Good morning, everyone. I am Miss Gian, and welcome to Chapter 1 of our Social Psychology course. So, in this video, we will talk about the following topics. First is what is social psychology, then some of the research questions that we can, encounter in social psychology, the five big ideas of social psychology, how we construct our social reality, for example, and etc. I'll introduce it to you later. And we will also be touching how values influence social psychology as a science and also the research methods in social psychology. So, before we dive in, I want to start with a question. What do you think social psychology studies? That's the question. So you can pause the video, write down your thoughts, or say it out loud. And then we'll go back to what you wrote there, what you said after a few seconds. So I take that you've paused the video, so let's continue and let me give you a formal definition of what social psychology is. So, social psychology is the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. Those three things are very important. Think, social thinking, influence, social influence, and relate to one another, social relation. So, it focuses specifically on the influences of our situations with special attention to interpersonal effects. So, in social psychology, we examine both individual responses and general patterns of human social behavior. Now, let me ask you, where does social psychology fit in the broader field? Because it's usually compared between sociology. I mean, students get confused sometimes of sociology and personality psychology because it kind of like have those kind of ideas on social psychology. So, how does it fit? So, think of it as sitting at the boundary between psychology and sociology. So, it's more individual focused and experimental than sociology. Pero it's also more situational focused than personality psychology. So I want you to imagine a group project in class, and then social psychology is in between the two, sociology and personality psychology. So personality psychology would focus on you as an individual. So your traits, like whether you're shy, outgoing, or a natural leader. While sociology would focus on the whole class as a group, like what's the culture of the whole class? What's the rules within this class? Right? For example, there is a specific rule in BS Psychology 3A and also a different kind of set of social norms in BS Psychology 3B, right? What are the patterns? So those are like more general jud ang sociology, more ano gyud siya, looking the whole group. And then social psychology is in between. So it would ask questions like, how does being in a group change the way you behave? So, for example, why might a normally quiet student suddenly speak up with confidence when they're surrounded by their friends? Or why might a certain student who's originally very hardworking on their own would suddenly put lesser effort when in a group? Like lima sila kabuo compared to when they're alone. There's actually an actual study with that. So, social psychology is actually less about your fixed personality traits and also less about society as a whole. It's about how the situation and people around you influence your kanang thoughts, your feelings, and also your behaviors. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, I want to share some very fascinating fact actually is that social psychology is very young as a field. So the first experiments ni social psychology was just over 100 years ago, and it's not actually what it is now until the 1930s, and it boomed in Asia in 1970s. So if you see the timeline, it's quite very young compared to other sciences na kuan ano eras and eras and eras have gone through fire for a long time. So that's kind of fascinating, right? That it's a young field. It's a young field, and we can actually like ask more questions. Lot of unanswered questions. So there's more opportunities for us to um, ask a lot of questions. Considering also that it also touches on I mean, it sits in the middle of sociology, so it touches on like the culture of the society, and culture. Sorry, culture is ever changing, always morphing to something. Right, so in this next slide, we will look at the curiosities or questions that are of interest to social psychology. We'll just pick a few interesting ones. Not really the whole hundreds and hundreds of questions social psychology asks. Um, wow, asks. Well, let me share some few questions that drive the social psychology research. So, first question: how do we interpret situation versus objective reality? Another question is what makes people comply with authority, or even when they're given harmful orders. Then third, when do people help others versus help themselves? When in what situations do we become selfish? And another sort of question is how do social beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies? So let me give a few examples on a few examples that actually illustrate these questions. So first, kanina question, how do we interpret situations versus objective reality? Well, there was a research about couples, right, who are married, and they found that happy couples actually tend to attribute their partner's negative behaviors to external factors. Because, example, if nambusdak si partner, and then they would say na actually he's just tired from work, or she's just exhausted from the commute. So external nilang pag-attribute o pag-explain sa behavior is something outside of one's control. But then they also examined unhappy couples katong magsigilag away, and what they found out is that these couples, when interpreting a behavior, they actually interpret it into internal factors, meaning to naa sa individual ang reason why the behavior is happening. So mo na sila nambusdak siya kay na siya anger issues, or nambusdak siya kay ano gyud siya nataw kanang di siya ka control sa iyang emotion well. So that's the example how social psychology is trying to answer certain questions that are of interest to them. What else? Yeah, let me share a very fascinating and also quite famous guni siya na it's the talk of psychology everywhere. You talk to a psychology student, they probably will know what is Milgram's shock experiment, or other terms of it is Milgram's obedience study. And it's actually replicated from all around the world. I'll let you see a video of like a short snippet of what this shock experiment is, but there is, I think, a documentary about it. So if you're interested, you can go and check it out.
Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Teacher.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud. Horse. Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Refuse to go on. The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're going to get a shock. 180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
You
here.
can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music. And
2/3 of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering a less voltage. Can't you check in to see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
But technically, what is this study about? Disobedience studies ni Milgram. Milgram wanted to find out if this was the aftermath sa Holocaust sa Germany, and then he wanted to find out whether this same holds true for the Americans or sa US. And it's very shocking because he found out that 2/3 of participants actually complied with orders to deliver the shocks that were already dangerous just because a person wearing a lab coat told them, quote unquote, please continue. Okay, so that's very, very quiet, very shocking. Also, makatindig balahibo no na people are willing to go as far as deliver harm to others just because an authority figure told them to do so. So what happened, ang nahitabo ato is supposedly si Milgram, he wanted to conduct cross-cultural na studies, but because iyahang results replicated what happened sa Germany, he didn't kwan. I don't know if this info that I read online is kanang verified, but that's what happened. But technically, because famous kay siya, a lot of people replicated it all around the world, and they found consistent results. If there's an authority figure, no matter the race, no matter the circumstance, they would likely follow. So, kani siya na mga questions class is not just kuan lang, wala ko'y lingaw, so mag-as-as lang ko. These are actually real patterns that affect our daily lives. And these questions actually help us understand human behavior in a social context and all its complexity. So, mo na siyang mga questions na i-ask sa mga social psychologists to help us better understand ourselves in our kanang social environment, our social worlds. Now, I want to introduce you the 5 big ideas ni social psychology, or like the 5 guiding principles. These are core principles that will organize our thinking throughout our social psychology course. So first, we construct our social reality. Second, our social intuitions are powerful but sometimes perilous. And third, social influences shape our behavior. The fourth one, personal attitudes and dispositions also shape behavior. And the fifth one is that social behavior is biologically rooted. Now, why do these matter? These principles? Well, they provide us an organizing framework for understanding social psychology or a social phenomena. These frameworks also help us kanang predict and explain human social behavior. And yeah, so basically, if you compare it to music has foundational concepts. Music has rhythm, has melody, has what you call harmony, right? And biology has these organizing principles like the biology as a field has natural selection as a central organizing principle. So social psychology then has these 5 core principles that actually guides us in our studies and also hundreds of theories. So throughout sa ang course, you see na kaning mga principles actually interconnect, and they also apply to everything, down from your favorite romantic relationships to prejudice. So, sa helping behavior, sa group dynamics, sa dynamics sa workplace. So, all of these 5 tie up to the theories that we'll soon encounter as we go about and himay-himayon, these theories. So, now, let's explore first the big idea number 1. The first big idea is that we construct our social reality. we have an irresistible urge to actually explain and predict behavior. So the same, according ani na principal class, this same situation, I want you to listen carefully. This same situation can be interpreted completely differently by different people. So in essence, we're intuitive scientists. We constantly make meaning out of a situation, make attributions about a certain behavior, interpret a certain behavior. And the way we interpret, kani nga tong pag-interpret sa behavior sa tao, mixture na siya sa ato ang beliefs, sa ato ang mga naagian sa person, ato ang mga values. Okay, and our disposition at the time, our feeling at the time. Okay, so example, I have an example. When I was working in the HR industry, when I was working in the industry as an HR, we were in the elevator with my supervisor. Then, pag open na mo sa floor, ting, di ba na sound effects ni Sudsi, amo ang director. For context, if you're not working yet, the director is a higher position than the supervisor. So, si director, babae man siya. And then she suddenly said, no, well, and then the elevator closed. When the elevator closed, na din si director na, kanang, hey, do you know that, kanang, I'm so tired because I was the one grabbing the chair, and then, I was arranging the tables, because there's a client, and then I cannot see kuya pertaining to to our kanang, janitor sa office. And then, I was helping kuya, blah, blah, blah. She was voicing out her concerns. Then she stepped out of the kanang elevator because we arrived at the floor. And then we need to go down pa man. So, kami nila nabili ni supervisor. And then, my supervisor told me, na siya na, you know what, Je? I think she wants me to help her arrange the chairs. Ako, huh? Because for me, she was just voicing her concerns. Pero for my supervisor, he actually thinks na that katong pahungaw ni supervisor is her indirectly asking for his help. So, yan na, siya no, what's the behavior there? Pag letting out the feelings. And how is the behavior interpreted? It was interpreted differently by two people. It's the same behavior, but it was interpreted by two people differently. Okay? So, an example of this one sa atong source is the 1951 Princeton research. So what happened here is kani siya na game class sa Dartmouth. It was very rough. It's a dirty football game. And there were fist fight, there were injuries, and then the researchers actually asked the two. I keep saying actually. You guys get a countdown and tally my actually. Ang researchers asked Princeton and kanang Dartmouth to watch the video and tally, like how you will tally my actually, tally the violations that the other team has committed. And what they found out is, si Princeton, miingon siya na kanang, ako rin bot ang number ha, pero that's just to give it a context. Si Princeton man na siya, actually si Dartmouth na ay 52 ka violations, niya kami kay Tenra. Niya si Dartmouth, miingon siya na, uy si Princeton na ay 68 ka violations, kami kay 8 ra ka buok. So what happened is, it's the same game, it's the same film. There is an exact number of violations, but the way it's interpreted is always construed by one's certain beliefs, feelings, dispositions at the time. So, muna siya. Munang conclusion that there is an actual number of violations, there is an objective reality, there is an actual motive behind the director's expressing her feelings, di ba, naaman. But how we interpret that is, can we erase and go back? There is an objective reality, a certain violation, maybe a motive behind expressing our feelings, pero the way that we view it is always through the lens of our own values and beliefs. And class, this isn't just about sports or work. It is everywhere. You can notice it. And even yourself, makita na ninyo. It applies to politics, relationships, or daily interactions. And it actually connects to what psychologists call, you'll probably encounter this a lot, confirmation bias. Okay, so we wanna pick out of the many stimuli that we encounter every day. We just wanna pick out those that confirm our beliefs. Okay, so you be very aware about this one. especially when you're in a disagreement with someone. You remember this first principle ni social psychology that we construct our own social reality. Okay, let's now move on. Since we're done with the first big idea, let's now move on to the second one, which is that our social intuitions are powerful but perilous. But before understanding this, the second big idea actually focuses on how we think. So how we think, there are two types accordingly. Naatay dual processing system. We have the conscious deliberate thinking na slow, requires a lot of effort, ni siya na thinking because it's deliberate. And we also have the unconscious automatic thinking na paspas and intuitive. So when we say social intuitions are powerful but perilous, we're actually looking at the lens of our fast, automatic, and unconscious na thinking. And in fact, class, Daniel Kahneman actually wrote a famous book, Ani. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you guys want to check it out, read through it. Yeah. Our intuitions actually is very powerful. We have automatic processing and implicit memory. What does this mean? We can make instant emotional responses to people and situations. And this is good because it makes us good at reading nonverbal communication. And our mental shortcuts are actually useful, which are called heuristics, to make quick decisions. But when is our intuition kind of putting us at a disadvantage? So it can be perilous when a certain heuristic would influence your decisions, or a certain heuristic would influence your life. Let me give you an example. Have you heard of the availability heuristic? Now, people actually fear flying more than driving, even though ang commercial flying is actually 170 times safer per mile than driving. If you just look at the statistics, compare nimo, mas dagan ang car crash compared sa plane crash. Nga naman, ang plane crashes manggod, memorable ka na siya, news niya, ma-highlight siya everywhere. And naa siya more media coverage because mas mustik siya sa ato ang mind and mas vivid siya than thousands and thousands of car accidents na mahitabo every day. So mo na siya, people are fearful of flying because it's what they see usually blasted on social media. So there are more people that are kanang have, plain what's the term na, flying anxiety compared to driving anxiety. But ako sa class, akong algorithm sa Facebook, puno kasi mga car crashes. So, nako'y driving anxiety. Wala ko'y plane anxiety kay panagsaraman sa kung makakitag mga mga plane crashes. And then, I like traveling. So, mo na siya. No, depends really good on the social situation. Another thing, we're very confident about our memories. And sometimes we misread our own minds. Sometimes, mo na ka ng palit ko aning socks big everyday na ko mo dagan. Ang ending, padung na human ang year, wag yapon ka nakadagan. Dagan na kay kagsak sa drawer. Hindi ko naman sinasabi na ako to, ha? Pero ako nga to. So, we're very, we overestimate ourselves. And also, we also we also make poor predictions about our behaviors later in the future. Like, there's a longitudinal study na people were rating them, were being asked ba na, what would you feel, how would you feel if you're grieving someone, or if someone you love is suddenly na matay, or imong boyfriend gibuwagan ka, how would you feel? And then they would say na, actually, feel ko din ako mabuhi, siya ragid akong life and everything, dili ko maka-work siguro for a lot of years, like 4 years, and basig dili na jud the same akong life. Like, feel ko dili gyud ko ka-survive, feel ko magpakamatay pug ko, nga na ang kind of response nila. Guys, the way that I explain is not really technical jud na what happens sa study, ha. I'm just gonna elaborate some of the kuan to just drive home the point. So just to make you aware of kuan na kanang basig maka-encounter mo sa study mo na pataka tos miss man na ingon og gani na word by word. Just really to drive the point home. Well, going back, so what the psychologists actually found out after a few years, and it actually happened, is that they were able to bounce back. So wrong ilang pag-predict silang self. So nga na siya. And these are not character flaws, class. These are actually what makes us human. These are features of how we think, of how human cognition works. And understanding them helps us make better decisions. Okay? Next, let's move on to the third big idea, which is that social influences powerfully shape our behavior. We are fundamentally social animals. Mo ba, miss? Nga nung nakaingon man kaana, pataka rin kamis, eh. Well, class, there is a study sa University of Texas, and they found that students spend 30% of their waking time in conversation, talking to someone. Now, this indicates na ang relationships is very important to human nature, and we respond incredibly powerfully sa ato ang immediate context. And this makes us kanang na very dramatic ang power sa situations. As mentioned sa katong if you know that what happened during the Holocaust, people can actually do evil things under social pressure, and we saw that again during the Holocaust. That was replicated in the laboratory during the Stanford Milgram obedience experiment, where these people are ordinary people. They probably don't score very high in the kanang narcissistic scale or in the Machiavellianism, what was that? Scale or some sort that tells you you're evil, you're narcissist, you're a psychopath. They're ordinary people that participated in atrocities because they're pressured socially. And we also see the opposite. Na there are generous responses to disasters like the 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunami. Na people were showing or were helping each other. Very altruistic, a remarkable altruism that happened during that disaster in Japan. So you see, cultural influences are everywhere, though we often don't notice them. And there are different standards for different culture in terms of behavior. For example, lahi-lahi ang standards of promptness, like the way you view time. Lahi-lahi siya per culture. If you know, Japan is very strict sa time. Us Filipinos and our Latin cultures, like because we're conquered by Spain, so of course we follow quite a lot of their norms. So we view time very, very differently from Japan. And in some cultures, direct criticism is valued. Sample sa West, right? They wanna say what they wanna say, right? They're not scared of they're not scared of confrontation. We are scared of confrontation. We Filipinos always wanna compromise, and we have this sense of kanang maguba ang relationship, dili na lang ko moingon, eh. Right? And well, the same pod sa clothing norms. Remember, we're already talking about norms. So you probably will get an idea na how you do your norm violation experiment. We have different clothing norms, different body image preferences, lahi-lahi tag concepts of justice. We're also different in the way we focus our goals. We're very collectivistic ang Filipinos. I'm not sure how, pero that's the study, Philippines is very collectivistic. Maybe medyo ni tilt na ang scale because of globalization. A lot of us has adopted Western thinking and values as well. So that's pretty nice to look at, to read on more. So all of these vary culturally. And as psychologist Hazel Marcus said, people are above all malleable. So that means we're not deterministic. We actually adapt to our social context. And as I mentioned again and again, the same person might behave very differently in different social situations. So this connects to conformity studies and cultural psychology that we'll explore more in depth later sa course. Third class, let's go to our fourth big idea. I'm consciously preventing myself from saying actually. No, hayaan nyo na. Our fourth big idea balances the previous one, which is personal attitudes and dispositions also shape behavior. We're not passive tumbleweeds, class, that's just blown around by social winds. Like unsay environment mo niya to respond ana. But that's the critique. Remember your intro to psych? That's a critique sa behaviorist na kanang behaviorism na psychologist na dili man mechanistic ang tao kung sa ingon sa environment mo dito na ditag suon dayon dili man tay ngana, di ba? So, our internal forces matter. Our traits matter. Our example, people who are very high in morality probably did not listen or was one of the 1/3 na wala ni tuman sa experimenter to deliver the shocks, right? So, example, political attitude influence our voting behavior or smoking our smoking attitude affect how susceptible we are to peer pressure. And our attitude toward the poor influence our helping behavior. So individual differences mean that in the same situation, different people respond differently. And what's very interesting is that the influence is bidirectional. Our attitudes affect our behavior, but our behavior also affects our attitudes. So we tend to believe in what we've committed to. So if you volunteer for a cause, you're likely to develop stronger attitudes ani na cause. And say for example, let's drive close to home. Say for example, initially you don't have a playful mindset. Like if I have a scale and I let you answer, and then what will come out is you're not really playful as a person. And then our course would require you to develop that kind of mindset and to actually perform or to be in play, right? And right after the class, your attitude changed. So that's what we're pertaining to saying na influence is bidirectional. So our attitude affect our behavior. So initially, if you don't like play or don't have a playful mindset, you wouldn't want to play, of course. You'd view it negatively. And then you're tasked to play. That's the behavior. You're now doing the behavior, which is playing. And so, this behavior, na thinking na, hala, I'm playing lagi. And then, I noticed ako self na even if we're not in class, I'm now looking at ways on how to do things more fun. So meaning, na-develop na inyohang pagka-playful. So that's what we're pertaining to when we say the influence is bidirectional. We tend to believe in what we've committed to. And this also emphasizes that attitudes and situations interact rather than them operating independently. And understanding the relationship between the two, it's very crucial in predicting and explaining behavior, which is a major goal in psychology, by the way. Remember the 4 major goals of psychology? You don't remember na? Sige, pangduklon ta mo. So, next, let's move to the 5th and the final big idea, which is that social behavior is biologically rooted. Now, we take on a biopsychosocial perspective, ani, which means na every psychological event is simultaneously biological. Nature and nurture together create who we are. We carry genes that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce, but we also have an enormous capacity to learn and adapt to our social environments or current environments. And these are the fascinating questions that social neuroscience asks. Example, what brain areas enable love, contempt, helping, aggression? How do brain, mind, and behavior function together? And do personality differences show up in brain activation patterns? But again, this isn't simple biological reductionism. Sa may meaning, if mo ingon tag reductionism, meaning biologically Mingon ta na, did you know na kanang hormones play a part in how blah 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 blah? And then mo settle na jud ka na, it's just the hormones that did everything. Like loving, like because I what do you call that? Because I'm starved with oxytocin. Saan pa pronounce na? Mangita na tag na sa'yo ni pronounce. Because I'm starved with the happy hormones. So now I'm looking for a partner because of the lack of hormones. Like gana siya, reductionist kay siya perspective. We don't do that. There is, and we know now na biological and social factors interact. We are now adapting a interactionist perspective to most of the psychological observations and theory. Example, okay, there's a study na ang social ostracism elevates blood pressure. Means very English, usa ng ostracism. Kanang example, magkaon mo niya, nakaingnon niya, dili ka paminawon ni bilin ra kaskilid bisag daho kay kag tingog. That's ostracizing someone. So that's social ostracism, and it's been found to elevate blood pressure among other biological responses. So unsa man jud tumbong aning tanan, miss? Well, the key insight, class, is that biological and social factors work together. We don't reduce them to complex social behaviors or just biological explanations like mga neural mechanisms or hormones and whatnot. But we study how different levels of these explanations inform each other. These two, again, adopting a interactionist perspective. So you probably will think, wow, the best na yun yung social psychology, miss. Di na ko mo take kong laing course. Mo na jud niya ako. It does apply to everyday life. So na siya personal benefit, na siya personal applications. It gives you better self-knowledge, helps you understand mga differences in influences, mga subtle. Makita na ninyo. The more that you read through sa mga theories, the more mo makanotice sa mga subtleties sa influences around you. That's very, very fascinating for me. Mo dyan yung pinaka-favorite na ako sa social psychology na na-develop na skills. So makakita mo, hala, foot in the door technique ni. Ginagago mo ba ako? So, yeah, it also improves your interpersonal relationship. And also, kung may conflict, mas better ni mo siya ma-address. No? For professional applications, sus gamit yung kayong social psych pod in health, in well-being, sa mga processes sa jury, sa mga environmental behavior, sa business, org psych, very useful. Ingon nga nila na ang MAIO psych daw, it's the social psych in the workplace. So technically, you're just really looking at who people are sa work. How do we control them to work more? Ako rin nagkatawa-katawa sa self-class. Di mo malayo na. Pero, it has scope and limitations. It does not give us life's meaning. Like, usay meaning sa akong life. Unsa jud akong purpose? Anong gibiyaan man kaniya? It's not a philosophy of life, class. What it does provide kay mga methods, asking important questions sa human behavior, and also gives us a scientific view of how humans are. Pero, you know what, class? In my MA, naami kanang part there, nag-talk about the cultural psychology. Partly po na siya, social psychology. Nani mga concepts of social psych. And the more, we have a kind of like us na discussion forum, but more on less, less hands-off. So kami rin yung nag-discuss about what we saw online, what we've read sa mga literature, sa RRL, and then our miss commented in one of our discussions, na siya na, this is one of the things good no na medyo bati sa social psych is that you quantify everything, na you think na kanang hala ko andi kanang very magical na phenomenon, for example, love, quantified di ay, naa di ay meaning behind it, naa di ay other factors behind it. Nga na, But well, that's social psych. But asa naman ko? Wait. Yeah, about the life meaning and purpose. Um, so whether you go to psychology or other field, these principles will be very useful. So if you become a teacher like me, understanding mga social influences will really make you a better teacher. If you're gonna be an HR, very helpful pud siya. So yeah, social psych principles are applicable in everyday life. Let's now move on because we're done talking about the five organizing principles ni social psych. Let's now move on and talk about values sa social psychology and how does it influence. Let's look at the bigger picture first. We will talk about how values influence social psychologists in their research. And sometimes it happens in obvious ways. So let's look at first the obvious way that values influence social psych. So we can see that in the rise of the research interest topic per era, say, during the 1940s. There was a rise of fascism. So mas daghan ang research about prejudice. And then the 1950s na ay era of social uniformity. So nadaghan dayon ang conformity studies around this time. Pag 1960s, during ni siya sa social upheaval, this is the time where there is social upheaval. So daghan na research ani is about aggression. And then pag 1970s mo ni ang feminist movement, and during this time there is a rise sa gender and sexism na research along the feminist movement. And then the 1990s and the 2000s na siya increase of diversity. So nidagan ang research about diversity and cultural differences. So nga na siya no, the way that, because again class, social psychology sits between the boundary of sociology and social and personality psychology. That's why kay evolving man ang culture, magsige pug ka-evolve ang research interests sa social psychologists. And cultural differences actually also affect research focus. So sa European social psychology, they tend to emphasize social identity. And sa American social psychology, usually emphasize individualism. And sa Filipino psychology, what do you think is emphasized? We have kapwa. So if you're interested, you can look into Filipino psychology. Also a very baby na field, Filipino psychology. So you can look at the theories there sa Filipino psychology. So yeah. So technically, the interest ni social psychology sa research questions actually go by the phenomena or what is currently the zeitgeist of the time. So we'll move on to the next discussion point, which is that there are subtle ways too where values enter psychology. So first, there are subjective aspects of science. Scientists interpret nature using mental categories that are influenced by their backgrounds and values. And then second, psychological concepts contain hidden values. Terms like mature or well-adjusted contain implicit judgments about what's good or desirable. And then third, labels reflect values. The same behavior can be addressed as defensive or showing high self-esteem. So when psychologists define quote-unquote the good life, they're making value judgments of what they think is a good life. Example, ani si Maslow. So iyang study is about self-actualized people. And the way na iyang gipangbunot ang mga self-actualized people na iyang pang-studyhon, because case studies man ni kang Maslow sa mga kanang self-actualized people. Siya na po yung namili para kung kinsa niya accordingly ang self-actualized people. The way he chose these people, na-influence sa iyang cultural values or na-influence of how he thinks human fulfillment looks like. So, normally, professional advice reflects the advisor's values. Mo nang kasagaran, there is a kung ano, na dili maminaw lang, like active listening, but not really tells you what to do. Like, sana siya na form of therapy, ha, forgot. Pero technically, dili gina sila mo advice ng kaning mga group of, this kind of governing therapy principle. It's because precisely of this kanang premise that sometimes professional advice, sometimes if not most times, actually reflects professional advice reflects the advisor's values. Yeah, nganong mo matter mani? Why are you talking about this? Ngano man, because scientific interpretation is a human activity. So ato mga beliefs and values, they influence the way we think. And then, kisa may mga nag-study ani, kisa may nag-asa question, tao man gyapon. So, miss, way gamit, kay bias man di ay, influence man di ay ilahang thoughts, ilahang values, or ilang principles, kung sila gidak-an. So, technically, wadi gamit ng social psych? Well, although yes, our beliefs and values influence the way we ask questions, the way we interpret the results, the solution is not to abandon questioning or abandon our questions pertaining to or of interest sa tuang self and how we interact with the social world. But rather, we need to ask more questions para keep us in check with each other sa atong mga potential biases. Like for example, if si Maslow lang ang nag-research about self-actualized people, dili na ma-question niyang biases. But then again, there are a lot of theories that followed him that look at self-actualized people that maybe falsified his theory. So, manang very important na ang theory is falsifiable. Yeah. So again, this isn't knowing that the way a question is interpreted or asked is also largely influenced by one's beliefs and values. Its goal is not to make you dismiss science or dismiss social psych altogether, but to make you, very important, and I want you to keep this in mind, it's to make you critical consumers sa research. So, just because there's a research of this, mo na mo, tinuod na di ayun na, i-apply na din mo sa everyday life. Example, na i-research na kung imo hatagag candy na blue, ang imo ang kanang crush kay kanang ma-in-love na din siya nimo. Say ha, nakabasa mo nga ng research ug asa nimo nakabasaan na ambot lang kaha. And then imo na din gi-apply sa everyday life without double checking it. So no is a no na dayon. It's giving wala nagbasag tarong. It's giving not really a true psychologist. So please be critical consumers of research, okay? So makauna na mo kaning mga gipangingon na mga research findings ba magmorjo common sense man siya. And sometimes podcast, if I share a research or theory I found online, I would get sometimes mingon na, oh bitaw kay ba makuha na. Say example man ako, did you know na ang red is found attractive because evolutionary psychologist back then, if pink og cheeks pink og mag-red is a sign of fertility or something. Mas bitaw, kibo man na kay red kay attractive man gyud. Example, a sign mo na pleasure, like entertainment, diba? Red mo man na, color theory man na. And makanatag kanang man natag kibong man ko ani. I knew it all along. There's actually a phenomenon which what we call hindsight bias. So sometimes an event seem obvious and predictable only after we knew it. So mo natag-an ko pa, pero sure jud kang natag-an jud nimo. Or hindsight bias lang na siya. So, common sense can actually support contradictory conclusions. So, I'll share a very good example highlighting this. After World War II, kani si Paul Lazarsfeld, nag-research siya about aning is like social psychology really just common sense? So na siya gipang present na mga statement or research findings. Ang research finding is number 1, better educated soldiers had more adjustment problems than less educated ones. Okay, mo na yung number 1. So meaning ang mga naidag ang soldiers na better educated mas naglisod og mas naglisod og adjust sa ilang soldier life than the less educated ones. Okay, mo agree mo? What do you think? What do you think of this research finding? Di ba makaingon mo bitaw? What's may mga thoughts around this research findings ninyo? Try to write it down daw. Sige na, i-pause in your class please. Kaya para maka-feel mo sa kanang effect. Ininghatag na ko sa plot twist. I-write down nga, i-rationalize nga no correct ni na research finding. Why do you think this is correct? Na better educated soldiers mas naglisod sila adjust compared to the less educated ones. Okay, mana magsuwat. So, actually, here's the plot twist. Mana tag, well, kailangan pa ba na studyhan na obvious man, better educated soldiers maglisod yun kay kuan good. Wala guna sila nagbuhi sa squatter. They're educated, so they're probably spoon-fed or they have a good roof on top of their heads. Nga na ba? Na rationalizing. Pero, the results weren't actually that one. Opposite ang gipresent ni Paul Lazarsfeld. So, ginagago tayo ni Paul. Ana siya na, the findings were different and the complete opposite. It's been found that better educated soldiers had fewer adjustment problems. So, these findings, makaingon tanong, obvious man, pero naadi siya contradictory statements. The same po na sa mga proverbs, no, manatag, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Pero na po other proverbs na out of sight, out of mind. So, usually, there's a statement, and then we think na, well, yeah, correct. I knew that. That is existing. So that's why we need systemic research rather than relying our intuition para dili ta madas kahig. So, speaking of research, let's move on to our next topic, which is research, correlational research. Ang purpose sa correlational research is to detect natural associations between variables. Ang advantage ani is makastudy tag important variables sa real-world setting and examine mga factors like race, gender, social status. Now we can ethically manipulate. We don't need to put anyone in distress like the Milgram obedience studies. Pero ang major limitation sa correlation is it cannot establish a cause and effect. Okay, say it with me. Correlation does not imply causation. And this is one of the most important concepts in research methods. I'm gonna give you a quirky example that highlights this, drives the point across. So there is a Scottish graveyards and researchers found a correlation sa taller grave markers and the longer lifespans aning mga tawhana. So what could potentially explain this? Okay, so maybe wealth protects health. Wealthy people can afford both better healthcare and thus taller na mga gravestones or graveyards. Or maybe health enables wealth accumulation, and because they live longer, they accumulate more wealth. Or maybe na a third variable, maybe diet or lifestyle affects both health and wealth. So, mana siya. You cannot really imply just because it's correlated. You cannot say na the longer lifespan caused the graveyards to be tall or the tall graveyards caused the longer lifespan. I'll give you a more kanang better example. Say there is a correlation sa increase in ice cream sales or ice cream consumption and violent crime rates. So, what could explain this? Does this mean na ang pagkaon sa ice cream kay makakos sa tao na to do crimes? What does this mean? Okay, so sometimes a relationship would look significant statistically, pero naa siya mga unrelated factors. So you cannot say na the ice cream caused the crime rate to rise. What's the third variable there? What's the confounding variable? If you can guess it, meaning love ka ni Lord. The third variable there is probably because it was hot. So what does being hot mean? What does a hot weather mean? Summer. So what does summer mean? There are a lot of people. And what happens when there's a lot of people? There might probably be a lot of crime in that area. Okay? So naa siya'y confounding variable. You cannot really directly imply causation when there is a correlation. It's very important for you to know that, for you to remember that, especially sa thesis ninyo, okay? So, yeah, one cannot say that a long lifespan would cause taller graveyards or that ice cream caused the increase sa crime rates or vice versa. So we're done now with correlation. Let's discuss experimental research, which can establish cause and effect. This is the key. So, mo na siyang favorite po sa social psychologists. They wanna eliminate all the confounding variables. And they wanna control the variables mo nang they really use to conduct experimental research. Ang key feature aning experimental research is manipulation sa independent variable. Mo control po ni og extraneous factors like say katong hot weather that I mentioned earlier, mga random assignment conditions, and the ability to establish causation. And very important ang ethical consideration sa experimental research. There needs to be an informed consent. We have an informed consent sa tong norm violation experiment. And there's minimal deception only when justified ang deception. Katong kang Milgram na study, he actually used deception. And there is the maleficence versus the beneficence. Sakto ba ko? Wait, cross-check natin later ha. Actually, class gikapoy na jud ko. So, kamo na cross-check unsa to siya. But the harm versus the benefits sa research, na-overcome man ni Stanford kaya dako kay siya contribution sa social psych. So, okay ra, justifiable ra to iyang pag-deceive sa participants. So, nga na siya, naay weight in terms of considering if ethical imong research in terms sa harm na iyang maka-conduct versus sa benefit. What would we get out from it? If more on harm ta niya, gamay ra dig benefit, ayun na lang padayon ng research. Okay? Sample ani, kaning studies sa obesity prejudice. Ang researchers, na sila people na will talk on the phone. And then, while they're talking sa phone, na sila picture na tanawon. And then, it could be overweight ang naa sa picture or kanang normal weight. But they can't see, kinsa ilang nakitaan. Ang ilang nakitaan ra is kanang picture. And what the researchers found out, na even though the person couldn't see the person that they're talking on the phone, they rated the conversations more negatively when they're looking at the overweight photos. So, nakakonclude ang mga researchers ay tinuod gyud ay naagi ay prejudice sa mga tao when a person is overweight. So, very interesting, right? Experimental research sa social psych. Ang problem ng ani class sa Philippines, gamay ra kay mo conduct ana kay we don't have a lot of the materials man. Usually kailangan gini siya laboratory environment, very rigorous na study yun. Very rigorous in its methods. Kailangan po ni siya mo undergo a very strict ethical consideration. So kailangan gini siya mo agi og ethical review ethics committee. Yeah, pero ang ano ana is very powerful ang whatever effect or whatever finding na makuha out from a experimental research. Okay, with that in mind, we're now sa experimental research. So let's address an important question. Do laboratory findings generalize to real life? So, as mentioned, laboratory research has significant strengths. It uncovers basic dynamics of human behavior, provides controlled environment for testing theories, findings often replicated in field settings. So, ano siya ang mga strengths sa laboratory research. What are the limitations sa laboratory research? Strong and very powerful, kailang gipang remove ang extraneous variable. Pero, technically, kung igana maday, controlled ang setting, so dili siya ma-generalize sa real life. Kaya in the real life, na may other factors involved. Right? So, dili siya makuan. Dili siya ma-represent in real life, say, because of the rigorous design sa experimental research, usually, gamay rapod kay na siya ang makuha na mga studies. So, gamay ra ang population or gamay ra ang sample and usually ang kaning mga laboratory studies na or mga experimental research mabasa ninyo sa Google Scholar or say sa other journals sa kanang research direct na journal kay usually magpari-pariha rin ni ilang mga sample, usually from weird cultures. Unsa na dili weird objectiva, it's an acronym for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic cultures. So katong mga indigenous population na dili na siya ma-accounted for. Ang mga people usually na wala naka-college, dili na siya ma-accounted for. Minority groups, dili ma-accounted for. So we need to distinguish between content and process. So content varies dramatically across cultures. There are specific attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors na mo differ, but processes class tend to be more universal. So how do these attitudes form? How do they change? How do people respond to social pressure? How relationships develop? So, surface diversity often masks underlying similarities. So, for example, the ingredients of loneliness, they're very similar across cultures. Shyness, uncertain sa life purpose, na ay low self-esteem, they all predict loneliness. Whether naka sa London, whether naka sa Sao Paulo, Tokyo, and the Philippines. Ang family structure and peer influences predict similar outcomes across different ethnic groups. So, ang important point is, while behaviors may differ across cultures, we are influenced by similar social psychological forces. And this gives social psychology broad applicability, while also acknowledging na naay cultural differences. And so, let me wrap up with our key takeaways. Finally, I'm so glad. Social psychology studies how we think about, influence, and relate to others. And next, the 5 core principles provide an organizing framework for understanding human social behavior. Third takeaway is that research methods balance real-world relevance with scientific rigor. The fourth one is that values and biases affect research, but scientific methods help control for them. And the last one is that laboratory findings often generalize to real life, but cultural sensitivity remains crucial. In the coming weeks, we'll explore social cognition and attribution, attitudes and persuasion, conformity and obedience, prejudice and stereotyping, and attraction and relationships. Kaning each topic, we will build on it to get our foundational principles of social psychology. Okay, we're officially done, and here are my final thoughts. Social psych is about your life, your beliefs, attitudes, and relationships. So use these principles to understand yourself and others better. You need to pay attention to how situations influence you and others. Try to notice your own biases and how you construct your reality. So you also recognize the power of social influences while acknowledging na naay important na individual differences that will interact with these social influences. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention and for listening. Maybe some of you kay naglisten while naglaba, nagluto. Thank you. Thank you still. I look forward to exploring these fascinating topics with you throughout the semester, and I hope you get out a lot from this one, and it is a starting point for you to be interested in reading the other chapters ahead of time. Right? Thank you, and as always, have fun learning.